Hey, good morning. Welcome inside Mr. Small's Theater for this week's edition of Geik's Got Game. I am Geik, Matt Gaitka, M-A-T-T-G-A-J-T-K-A, and I'm here with you for the next hour to talk mostly sports. Yeah, there's some traditional sports talk radio mixed in with my varying ramblings and jaunts to varying parts of my brain and, the world out there at large. The world out there at large, at least in terms of the eastern seaboard, is covered in snow, and I'm okay with that compared to yesterday, which was just dark and damp and dank and every D word in the book you could probably come up with. As I was just telling my producer and engineer and the maestro of River's Edge, Brian Crawford, seated to my left, if it's going to be cold, I'd rather it include some snow. The white stuff does at least bring some light into the proceedings, and that's what bothers me the most this time of year is the lack of light. It's not so much the cold, although as you can tell from my apparel today, I'm definitely bundled up. I'm wearing my Winter Classic Penguins jersey from 2011. Not a very popular one among Penguins fans because that was, of course, the same night that Sidney Crosby suffered the first of a couple concussions that put him out for more than a year, really, when it came down to cutting into his prime scoring years. But I always liked the uniform. I like blue on the Penguins once in a while. But more appropriately for a day like today, the large skating penguin, as I lift here above the perimeter of my laptop, is wearing the scarf. So it's the fat penguin. It's not so much the broad-shouldered penguin that we see these days. So that's why I wore this today. And also have my Marshall tassel cap. I went to Marshall University. This week was another anniversary of the plane crash, which wiped out the entire football team in 1970. Always near and dear to my heart and anyone who is a member of the Thundering Herd. I'm definitely a son of Marshall, as I've discussed on this show in the past. So yes, there is meaning to what I'm wearing today. I try to bring some meaning to it if I'm going to be on video, in addition to streaming through your speakers on your device, whether it be a laptop or a tablet or a phone. We're on riversedgepgh.com. That's where the 24/7 live stream lives. And then, of course, we have the video options at riversedgepgh.com/live. And on Facebook Live, where we are simulcasting on my Matt Gaitka media page. The first segment of this program will be about hockey. If you're a Penguins fan, you're probably a little concerned, or maybe a lot concerned, about the state of the club. Now technically in last place in the Metropolitan Division. Out of 8 teams, the Penguins are number 8. But as I just mentioned on Twitter this morning, to universal acclaim, they are just 3 points out of third. So it's not like this is a big spread. Yes, it's early, and yes, the division is tight as we expected it to be, as most of us expected it to be. But that's not the reason why I'm advising caution for anyone who wants to look into some sort of a big overhaul here. And yes, I'm talking to you, General Manager Jim Rutherford, armed with that new 3-year contract extension. I'm a little nervous about the job security and how that may embolden the Penguins' 69-year-old GM. Not to throw age in there, but I think it is part of the narrative with Jim Rutherford, and I'll explain in just a little bit here on the first period of today's show. Also, the NFL, the National Football League, does not get talked about often on this program, but it has this promotion related to uniforms called Color Rush. And if you're a Steelers fan, the Color Rush game is where the Steelers wear black pants to go with their black jersey. It's like a monochrome, big, bold look. In the case of the Steelers, not so bright, obviously, with black being such a huge color in their scheme. But overall, across the league, yeah, you'll see some different looks there. And the league mostly going for an alternative look. I mentioned monochromatic. Not always the case, but yeah, they like to flush out your screen with these bright colors. And while I do admit that I like that promotion from the NFL, I like to see different uniform combinations and teams and leagues taking chances when it comes to fashion, as obviously you would attest by looking at what I'm wearing today. I think in the NHL, we're in the golden era, if you will, pun intended, of bright, bold colors. And you just look last night on the ice with the Penguins taking the rink with their early 80s inspired, predominantly gold uniforms. And I'm just loving the way that hockey is going, especially at the top level when it comes to that. So we'll dig further into the aesthetics of hockey later on in the hour. Also, I've gone soft in my old age when it comes down to reacting to trades. Carl Hagelin moved, as I'll discuss here in just a little bit, the two-time Stanley Cup champion with the Penguins and another Stanley Cup finalist with the Rangers in 2014. Playoff performer extraordinaire. The guy who's played the most NHL games, regular season and playoffs, since his debut in the 2011-12 season. Well, Carl and that magnificent mane of his, that beautiful Swedish man, is moving on to Los Angeles in a one-for-one trade this week, bringing Tanner Pearson to Pittsburgh. Two guys in Hagelin and Pearson who are pretty comparable in their current offensive states. Their levels of offensive production would indicate maybe both are due for a bounce back, maybe Pearson more than Hagelin. But beyond the hockey, after I'd covered the team, after I've now, gotten a little bit of age on my bones here, I find myself thinking more about the human element of trades than I do about just the strict transactional part of it. So that's coming later in the hour. Also, I want to give a standing ovation and a tip of the cap to the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. They're about to do a major mitzvah coming up here on Sunday, and I'm going to play a very small part of it, but I'm going to play a part in it, and I'll describe further before we log off for the week. But let's talk some hockey here. Enough with the teases. Let's get into the meat of the show. The Penguins and their general manager, Jim Rutherford, are apparently in a state of, I don't want to call it upheaval, but there's definitely some anxiety there. And as I mentioned, the trade, Hagelin for Pearson, maybe the first of many that could be coming this year if the man in charge, the man upstairs, Rutherford, doesn't like what he sees here on the ice with the team. And to be clear, lately, since that road trip to Western Canada that we talked about 2 or 3 weeks back on this show, looked like it had the Penguins with their ship righted. Well, since then, they've lost 7 of 8. And as I alluded to at the top of the show, they are tied for last in the Metropolitan Division with 17 points. 17 points in 17 games. That's a pace that's not going to get it done. It's not going to get you to the playoffs. 82 points in the age of extra points for overtime and shootout losses. That's really never gotten you to the playoffs. So I'm not saying that they're on a good enough pace to challenge for a Stanley Cup, because they are certainly not. But we are certainly also, before American Thanksgiving, before the quarter pole of the NHL season, if I'm using my horse racing metaphor correctly. And they still have played the fewest games in the Metropolitan Division as of right now. So they're 3 points out of third. That's where the Rangers currently sit. Things kind of topsy-turvy in the Metro right now. You have the Islanders and the Rangers up near the top in second and third, respectively. We thought both those teams were in rebuilding states this year. The Blue Jackets at the top of the division, I'm not terribly surprised by that. I like some of their offseason moves, and I still am bullish on that core as long as they don't deal Artemi Panarin or Sergei Bobrovsky before the end of the year. So that's not terribly shocking, but you have the Islanders and the Rangers up there, the Hurricanes challenging for a playoff position, and the Penguins all the way down at the bottom. So as I mentioned, appearances can be deceiving, but if you just look 1 through 8 in the Metro, yeah, that part catches your eye, certainly does. And in fact, the Pens are tied with the Florida Panthers for the fewest points overall. In the Eastern Conference, only the Blues and Kings have fewer points than Pittsburgh at this stage. I don't think we would have predicted that at any point in the season. Take any random 17-game sample, and I would not have picked the Penguins to be ranking 28th out of 31 teams, which is what they are at the start of this year. So let's put that out there, but then let's throw in some caveats. Number one, and here's number one with a bullet, if I may use the cliche, the Penguins are missing some key pieces. And I'm not just talking about number 87, Crosby, who missed his first game of what probably will be multiple games with an upper body injury. That was last night. He sat out in that 4-3 loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning at PPG Paints Arena. So, yes, Sid is out, but it's been more about longer-term injuries. Justin Schultz will be out through probably February or March with a broken leg that he suffered in Montreal very early on this season. Depending on how you look at it, depending on how you value offense versus defensive contributions, Schultz is either the Penguins' second-best defenseman or their third-best defenseman, but he's in a valuable category there. He's either top pairing or close to top pairing, and he's a valuable connection between the defensive zone and the offensive zone, also a valid power play threat. Schultz has been everything that we could have dreamed about when he was acquired from the Oilers nearly 3 years ago. So with him being out, and with him being one of those players that you've devoted a pretty decent chunk of the salary cap to, if you're Jim Rutherford, that one really hurts in more ways than one. Then you have Derek Brassard, who was the key acquisition for Rutherford last spring, an acquisition that I loved at the time, right before the trade deadline, picking him up from the Ottawa Senators. He was supposed to restore that depth down the middle the Penguins have had when they've won Stanley Cups. For the most part, they have had 3 legitimate lines when they have been at their best in the Crosby-Malkin era. It hasn't been just about those two, although those two really help. But when you have a Derek Brassard to take some of the load off, when you have a Jordan Staal to go back to last decade, when you have Nick Bino, who's playing pretty well in his first season as a Penguin, that's when this team is truly dangerous, and that's when they can just roll lines, and it takes a lot of the pressure off the coaching staff to pursue matchups. They don't have to pursue those matchups, is essentially what I'm saying, when you have a healthy, productive third-line center. And the Penguins haven't had that with Derek Brassard really since he got here. He played his first handful of games healthy. Then he suffered what probably was a groin injury late last year. Wasn't the same in the playoffs, even though he grinded it out. And now here in this season, he's been absent more than he's been present. So it's tough to judge right now is what I'm saying with the Penguins through 17 games. So when I hear Jim Rutherford say things like, oh, I'm a patient man, but I've run out of patience and things haven't been very happy around here lately, I think, well, Jim, you've been around for a long time. And that's when I bring up the age. Jim Rutherford is 69 years old. He's been a general manager for, 3 decades, whether it be with the Carolina Hurricanes or now with the Pittsburgh Penguins for, now getting close to 5 seasons. He knows the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of a season. He's also never been shy about making a move and realizing when things have gotten too far down the road. But I don't think that this team is anywhere close to being too far down the road, despite their position in the standings and just the raw points per game that they have generated. First and foremost, I think they're playing better than they have looked, or than they do look if you just look at the standings. And if you look at chances for and against, if you look at expected goals for and against, kind of a newer age metric, if you look at shot attempts for and against, the Penguins are maybe average to slightly above average. They're certainly not a 28th place team in the NHL, which is what the standings say they are at this point. So I think there's some course correction coming. For instance, last night, yes, you could point to discipline as being an important part of being a winning hockey team, but there's some bad breaks. There were some bad breaks in last night's loss to the Lightning. There were the consecutive penalties on one shift that led to the extended 5-on-3. There was Matt Cullen, who arguably shouldn't even be in the lineup at this point, but neither here nor there. Taking out a Lightning player in the slot during that 5-on-3 that extended that power play. It allowed Tampa to score 3 power play goals in 91 seconds to turn that 2-0 Penguins lead into a 3-2 deficit. That turned the game around, and goals change games. It seems cliche and obvious to say, but when you have those big moments that go against you, you can, for the most part, control play as the Penguins did last night and have the result go in favor of the opposition. So that's kind of, in a good way, a microcosm of the season so far. I think the Penguins have deserved better than what they've gotten. But with the injuries, I know you can't wait forever on injuries, but it's looking like Derek Brassard is going to be back pretty soon. It's looking like Sidney Crosby's not going to be out long term. The Justin Schultz thing might not be the easiest fix in the world, but I want to see a lot more from this team. I want to see close to a half a season from this team before I say, okay, it's time to make some major adjustments. And with Rutherford, a guy who I think we can all agree is being entrusted now with extending this championship core as long as possible, well, he's going to continue to do what he's done, which is trade future assets for present acquisitions. And first-round draft picks have gone out the window to a large degree under Jim Rutherford. And to a large degree, I have agreed with that general perspective, that general stance, where you say, we're only going to have Crosby and Malkin and Chris Letang, throw him in there too. He's shown how important he is when he's playing well this season. We only have these 3 in their primes. Also Phil Kessel, a top-of-the-line offensive performer, for maybe the next couple of years before things really start to go downhill. So we have to maximize the present. And those banners, they fly forever. As they say in the sport of baseball, it still applies in hockey, whether they're flying at the top of a baseball stadium or hanging at the top of a hockey arena. It's the same concept, right? You point up there and you say the Penguins have 5 Stanley Cups. If they can get a 6th, it'll be worth several years of pain. And I think if you asked a lot of Penguins fans who were around for the lean years of 2001 through 2006, you would say, yeah, that suffering was worth it if you can climb to the mountaintop. Not that it's guaranteed, but the idea is to put yourself in position to win those championships as often as possible. And whether through luck with some lottery help or going back to the mid-'80s when the Penguins tanked for Mario, pretty obviously, that short-term suffering has led to the long-term reflected gain of those championships. So I'm not disputing that, but I am a little worried that Rutherford might get itchy here. And I don't think this team deserves to be blown up at this point. You look at guys like Brian Rust, maybe he's been indirectly pointed to by the GM as being a guy who's gotten a little fat and happy. Not literally, hard to play hockey overweight. I think Brian Rust is probably due for an outburst. I think he's playing better than his numbers would indicate. I would say the same thing for Carl Hagelin as he has moved on. But I don't think this team is ready to be broken up. I don't think this team deserves to be broken up. I think this team deserves to have the benefit of the doubt at this point, both from the fan base and from its general manager. And I don't think you can expect a team that has climbed the mountain, that has been to the championship summit, to come out of the season gate with fire coming out of their mouths, just rolling out of there and being at the top of all of their collective games right from the start. I'm not saying that it excuses a team playing as the Penguins have for some stretches of this season, but I'm also saying that a veteran team is going to pace itself naturally. That's just what happens. And maybe a flaw of the Rutherford strategy in the past couple of offseason, bringing in more veterans as opposed to perhaps pursuing younger talent or entrusting younger talent like a Daniel Sprung or a Zach Aston Reese. Perhaps that has been a mistake. Maybe not calling up a Teddy Bluger or an Adam Johnson from Wilkes-Barre Scranton, instead signing Matt Cullen or Jack Johnson. For me, I'd rather take a chance on younger players, so in that way, the GM only has himself to blame if he wants to say, well, this team's cruising too much. Well, what do you expect when you have such a veteran-laden club? If you wanted more young and hungry, then you could have done that. You could have changed your focus in the offseason, but you elected not to do that. So there has to be a balance there, right? And I feel like the Penguins have gone a little bit too far toward that older, experienced balance. If there is one real criticism of that, of Jim Rutherford and how he's gone about his business, I would say it has been that, assuming that he wants to have that hunger, right? If he wants to have this team completely at 100% or close to it in terms of competition, in terms of battle, whatever the hockey term you want to use, then I think he might have gone about it in a wrong way. So a lot of his criticisms ring hollow for me, at least when it comes to that specific part of it. But overarchingly, my big takeaway is it's not time to make a big change. Back in a moment on Geik's Got Game here. Hope I made my argument convincingly. If you want to fire off some feedback, I'm there on Twitter, @MattGeika. I'm there on Facebook, @MattGeikaMedia, where this show is broadcasting right now and where you may be accessing it at this very moment. When we come back, I want to talk about trades and how my perspective has changed. I want to bring Brian Crawford in as well to discuss that, just to get the sports fan perspective. I've been a fan, I've been in media, and the latter part of that experience has definitely altered my point of view on this sort of thing. This is Geik's Got Game on the River's Edge.
Do you like professional wrestling? Want your discussions no holds barred? Check out WrestlingMayhemShow.com for all the wrestling podcast flavor you can handle.
Hi, I'm Matt Geika. This is my show, Geik's Got Game on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. Brian Crawford's alongside. I want to bring him in for some crosstalk here. Mr. Crawford, I find myself getting soft when it comes to reacting to trades. I just mentioned that I feel like this Penguins group deserved the benefit of the doubt to dig itself out of a little bit of a hole here at the start of the season. But I also understand the reasoning behind the Carl Hagelin trade to Los Angeles for Tanner Pearson. Maybe Pearson can give him a little bit more offensive punch, if not quite the same amount of speed and tenacity. All right, that's all the hockey stuff related to it. They're similar salary cap hits, so it all makes sense in terms of the financials as well. But Carl Hagelin, good guy, great guy. From my experience in the Penguins locker room, it's funny. You think when you're a fan, you might be more willing to buy into the human interest stuff. But I have found that working in the media, covering the Penguins for 2.5 years, most of which were when Carl Hagelin was with the Penguins. Well, it's not just him, but it's anybody. You feel like you at least get to know these guys a little bit. You talk to them face to face. And now I just feel myself being sad whenever players are traded away. That's my first reaction. Like, I feel like he was really fitting in. I know he liked the city. I know he liked a lot of his teammates. Patrick Hornqvist was a best friend on the team, both from Sweden. That makes a lot of sense. Their families hung out. And now that I have a kid, I worry about, well, where is his family going to settle in? How are they going to figure things out in their new city? So isn't that interesting how age and experience in that way has completely changed my point of view? 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, good trade. Okay, we'll see you down the line, Carl.
Yeah, that's what you see with a lot of fans. You see that very cutthroat mentality, but they don't have to experience that. Nobody gets traded from their job.
Yeah, right. It's a totally
Very
different
rarely,
scenario from what we're used to in
Exactly.
labor.
I don't know. I feel like I personally do look at the individual players. I was just on Twitter the other day. A notification popped up, and it told me that Bo Bennett. It was Bo Bennett had tweeted for the first time in a while, and I thought, Bo Bennett,
wow.
I haven't heard from
There's
him in
a
a
guy.
while.
Yeah.
So I clicked on the Twitter link, and here he's now playing in the KHL.
Mm-hmm. Over in Russia.
I had no idea. And I thought, I always liked him because he did a lot of work with Children's Hospital and things like that. I thought he was a great person in the city to have around. He just seemed like he was a good guy. So I do think of those kind of things, but I feel like most people don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think most men don't. I actually feel when you look at responses, it seems like women look at who these people are as people much more so than just like playing cards. I feel like men, when they look at the players, they often look at them as playing cards, and it's, oh, who cares? They're expendable. They're this, they're that. Whereas at least this is my observation, women seem to look at the person much more in depth and at the overall character of the person and notice those things a lot more.
I think I'm not going to dispute that. It's hard to really tell, right? And I think everyone.
It's very anecdotal. Too.
Everyone
this is just
has
my experiences.
Everyone has different reasons for following sports, right? I think all of us. I'm definitely a puck nut. I love the sport. I enjoy the idea of thinking, okay, if I'm the GM, as you saw in the first segment, if I'm the GM, what would I be doing in these situations? So that part of it is fun for me. I've never been a big fantasy sports person, so maybe I'm not quite to that level. I think fantasy sports also contributes to that because we all feel like, or the people who play them feel like, well, I could run this team better than that, or
I can't
could at least
stand those people.
I could at least competently run a team. I'm not a fantasy guy. I'm not judging anyone out there.
I'm not judging somebody who does it for fun. I just can't stand that mentality of, oh, I could do it, or this guy, he's an idiot. When they don't have to deal with any personalities, they don't have to deal with anything outside of looking at numbers on a sheet, which does not necessarily translate to real life.
Yeah, and you brought up the translation to real life for all of us in our work. We can't get traded against our will. It also makes me wonder, Brian, at some point, is this going to be outlawed? Are trades going to be, why is that allowed in sports, but in really no other industry? What other industry has that? I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
So I wonder if at some point the players rebel against that and say, you know what? No, you signed me to a contract. I'm staying here. My house is here. My family's here. I have friends here. You can't just make me move.
But isn't that negotiated in their contract? They have no trade clauses for certain players.
Some players do,
players
yeah. Some players do. But I'm saying maybe at some point players say, we're not going to sign this collective bargaining agreement with a league unless you agree that trades are off the board from now on. So I'm curious about that in the future if that ever comes to pass. Because when you think about it, what an upheaval for a player who, in Hagelin's case, has a house here, or at least has a permanent-ish apartment type of a situation, has a wife. If you have kids, like if you're Matt Cullen, you have 3-4 kids, whatever it may be, and you get moved.
Now,
Talk about putting all the pressure on everyone else in your family while you have to go out and you're expected immediately to perform. Fans wonder, well, why can't he report for the next game immediately? Well, it's a big life change. These are human beings, right?
Well, I do look at how much they make, and I'm not trying to say that should automatically, they have to do whatever. But you look at the regular job market, for example, the low-level employee, they don't transfer them. But if you are a bigwig in a company and you're making, a ton of money, sometimes they do transfer those people around the country into different places. Sometimes
transfers, yes, transfers are one thing, but
sometimes that's forced, though.
From one organization to another,
yeah,
that's a sports thing. I'm not really sure why this is.
But then again, that doesn't really
allowed.
Exist in any other culture. Like you can't transfer someone from. To look at radio, for example, you can't transfer someone from iHeartMedia to whatever it is, CBS, whatever they're called now. Intercom, yeah. Like you can't transfer one person from one company to another. They don't have HR departments that correlate.
And I wonder why. Why are these two worlds separate? For the most part, I think labor and sports are coming closer and closer together. We're seeing more overlap in those worlds, and it's been going on for 50, 60 years now. So we've made changes in that way, but the trade thing, and it's still from both a human standpoint and also just from a strictly job-related standpoint, I wonder why is this allowed to continue? It's bizarre.
Can you imagine if that was, if other jobs did act the same way? Like look at McDonald's, for example. You're having a bad team. This guy's not fitting in. Oh, we'll make a trade with the McDonald's down the street. We'll swap the
with Burger King
out.
Or Wendy's.
Yeah, or whatever. You switch the employees out, then both teams have a better roster, and they can sell more burgers.
Yeah. Well, where do you stand, to get back to my initial question, though? How much do you think about the human player when a player is traded or brought in, or say a coach is fired and a different coach is brought in? How much does that play on your heartstrings?
It does for me, especially now. As you say, when you get older, I think you think about that more often than you do when you're younger. When you're younger, though, you don't really understand that. I feel like you don't have the same kind of responsibilities. Now, you have a child, so you probably understand it even more so than I do. As a single person, it would be a lot easier for me to pick up and move, but it's still really difficult. All of your things are here, your friends are here, your life is here. And I think when you're younger, you don't have the same kind of things that are tying you down to an area, so you don't understand,
Okay.
I think, the difficulties of moving from place to place. As you get older, it's much more difficult to move. Even in my job, if I were to move from one part of the country to another, just things like right now I have very little seniority at my work, but if I had more seniority, you would lose all of that. You would be at the very bottom. You could have, if you work somewhere for 30 years, you move to a different part of the country, and then you have no seniority. So those kind of things do make a big effect on your life. So.
Well, Brian, you have plenty of seniority here at the River's Edge.
I would hope so.
I can't think of anyone who has more, in fact. Brian hosts River Talk every week. Brian is also alongside riding shotgun, or he has been for the past several weeks here.
Yeah, if I can make a quick note, this Sunday, tune in 7 p.m., we're going to be talking with Zach Fell and Jonathan Kilback, the managers of the Metal Edge, celebrating 1 year in operation.
So there you have it, the Metal Edge, one of the offshoots of the River's Edge, trying to keep growing and get better for you. Brian's at the head of that effort, of course, and I'm just happy to play a bit part here every Friday on Geiks Got Game. Back for the third period, I'm talking sports uniforms, a true passion of mine, and I'm talking about big and bold and why I was over the moon with the Penguins look last night despite the loss. All up next on the River's Edge.
Come on, go, it's green, come on, go!
God damn it, Brian. You need to calm down
Yeah,
with the road
I'm sick
rage.
of these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You gotta calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle heaven.
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck Knob.
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
Right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Well, too late now. I got to keep going. I'm not going to sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to The Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
From Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale, PA, just up the Allegheny from downtown Pittsburgh, this is Geiks Got Game, resetting it here for the third period of today's show. I'm Matt Geica. Brian Crawford's alongside on the ones and twos, pushing all the buttons, keeping things on the air, both on the website and also via our video streams, wherever you may be accessing them. Let's go over to Facebook, and I saw at least one comment I wanted to address. Our friend Jared Wickerham checks in, the Globetrotter from Houston is where he is this week. He's making some photos, to use his terminology, at the the Oracle Challenger Series, which is a tennis tournament. Jared does dabble in tennis and golf in addition to the team sports that we've seen him shoot so well over the years, whether it be here or at the Olympics or in the Boston area. Jared says hello from the Central Time Zone. So, yeah, a little bit earlier than usual down there for you, Jared. Nancy says hello. Mark Turba, new commenter. Hello, Mark. He says, I'm ashamed to say, this is in regarding to the first segment I did here today. He says, I'm ashamed to say that some Pens fans are spoiled. Well, yeah, fans get spoiled, right? The Atlanta Braves won 15 consecutive division championships, and, well, their attendance went down at the end of that stretch. They had one World Series. Penguins fans have had 3 championships over the past decade plus, or just decade in general. In fact, yeah, we're still not even 10 years beyond the first cup of the Crosby-Malkin era. So there's some of that. That's going to happen. What I'm worried about, though, relevant to the team, the fans can do whatever they want, right? That's the beauty of it, right? We can see everyone's takes on social media these days, but we don't have to pay them any mind. We can just not follow. We can take them in. We can mute them. We can block them. We can do whatever we want. But it doesn't really matter what the fans think. What I'm concerned about are the decision makers, and in particular Jim Rutherford. Is he getting antsy? Is he getting ants in his pants, getting happy feet in terms of trying to make a change here? I don't think he should, and I think he should be showing some more patience at this point. He has some capital to play with. This isn't like they haven't won a cup since he took over. They've won 2 of them. I know last year was a rough one, but they still made the second round of the playoffs. They were still successful by a large portion of the metrics you would look at, whether it be wins and points or goals scored, entertainment, sellouts. It's all still going on. The fan base is still there. So I think you can actually afford to show more patience than you would maybe back when he used to be the GM of the Carolina Hurricanes. He always felt like, I got to move now, got to strike now, or else the fans are going to go away. I don't think they're going to go away just yet if you have a steadier hand on the till than you may think is appropriate. So that's what I'm worried about there. Okay, back to the really important stuff. Sports uniforms. The Penguins last night were decked out in predominantly gold jerseys with gold helmets, and I like the gold helmets. Some said it looked too much like the Predators. I say the Penguins invented gold helmets. They had them in the 80s, so don't tell me about the Predators. They just are Johnny-come-latelys with the all-gold look at home. And I used to work with a fellow named Chris Orban at a former employer of mine, which shall remain nameless. He was our video guru. He was also a fellow sports uniform connoisseur and evaluator and analyst. And we would occasionally do a video called Jersey Duty, where we would go over some idiosyncrasies or some news from the world of sports kits and say why we did or we didn't like it. He was very adamant against gold jerseys with gold helmets on the Predators, so I'm sure he hated what the Penguins came out with last night. But for me, it's, number one, true historically to the history of the franchise. The Penguins had all gold uniforms with gold helmets. They were golded out in the early 80s. I know we don't have to always go back to that, but I think black helmets would take away from some of that. And I also think that you can mix and match. And I think back to the heritage of Pittsburgh sports. And what I got the vibe of last night watching that game, if you just take all the actual hockey action away from it, what I got the vibe of was the We Are Family Pirates of the late 70s. When they mixed and matched. They had, I think, 9 or 10 different uniform combinations with different hats and jerseys and pants. They even had pinstripes for a while, 2 different types of pinstripes, I believe. They had all black, they had all gold, and all the varieties that went with that. They had the striped pillbox hats, too. It was quite the garish era. But that was an identity for the Pirates of that time, and it didn't hurt that they won a great deal when they were wearing these wacky get-ups, at least in the standards of our era, they're wacky. Maybe in the 70s, they weren't quite as out there. With the Penguins right now, I think they have an opportunity, to get to my point, to do something like that. Mix and match. I love all their uniforms right now. I love the traveling whites. I think those are vintage and perfect. Maybe even put a gold helmet with that once in a while. Why couldn't you do that? Why couldn't you be a little more creative? And I think to the world of soccer, where they have color-on-color matchups so often. I'm talking about not contrast situations where in the NHL it's very rote. One team wears a white or a very light color, and one team wears a dark color, presumably because it makes it easier for the officials and the fans to tell the teams apart. But you're telling me that the Maple Leafs in blue and the Penguins in black, you couldn't tell that apart? Or maybe even a better comparison, the Leafs in blue and the Penguins in gold. Well, that's very different in terms of the color wheel, right? I don't think that would be an issue. I'd like to see more of those color-on-color type matchups in the NHL. And now that we're seeing teams embrace color, just look at the Penguins, look at teams like the Predators. Maybe they were one of the really early originators in this current era. Look at what the Carolina Hurricanes, speaking of them, are doing this year and bringing back the bright green of the Hartford Whalers, the former iteration of their franchise. Yeah, they're not doing it for more than 2 games this year, but we're seeing an influx in hues and textures and colors, and I love it. In sports in general, I think it's been more of a thing in the last 6, 7, 8 years after we got past the era of the late 90s, early 2000s, when seemingly everyone was introducing a black alternate uniform. Not everyone needs to wear black or red. It can be different. You can be special. differentiate yourself. The Kings, the LA Kings, should go back to the bright purple and gold, make themselves look like the Lakers on ice like they used to when they first were established at the Fabulous Forum in the late 60s and throughout the 70s and early 80s too. That was a brand. Be different. Be yourself. And for me, that means being more colorful. And I would like to see the restrictions on these teams be lessened. And maybe it's more of a load to pull for the equipment managers, for people who are planning those types of things out. But overall, I think it can be done, and a little bit goes a long way. Wouldn't it be cool to see the Penguins on the road playing Montreal in the red, Penguins in the gold? Talk about a clash there in a good way, I think. And as long as you can tell the two teams apart, and it's not like a two really dark colors going at it, I don't think it's a problem for referees. I don't think it's a problem for fans. I think it looks fantastic on high-definition television sets. I'll say that much. So while the Penguins were skating out on the ice to the Boys of Winter theme last night, I was thinking more Sister Sledge and We Are Family and how cool that era was for the Pirates. The mix and match, and I think there's a real possibility there for the Pens with their white jersey, with their black, with their gold. Mix up the pants, pick up maybe a gold shell for some of those pants to throw over the top. Hey, why not? Make it different, make it interesting, make it entertaining. That's what sports are supposed to be about. One final break here on Gike's Got Game while you mull that over and consider why I'm right. The Pittsburgh Riverhounds are doing a major mitzvah, to use some Yiddish here, and a very appropriate use of that dialect. Coming up this weekend, in fact, it's Sunday down at Highmark Stadium. I'm taking part in it. I hope you may find it in your heart to at least contribute to the cause. Really good stuff. That's how we'll wrap up today's show in overtime on Gike's Got Game.
Hey folks, it's Mike Sasson of The Mike Sasson Show. Me and Alex, my producer extraordinaire, looked at the landscape of internet radio and figured if we want to make it, we've got to work at least an hour earlier. Now on at 9 a.m. every Tuesday on the River's Edge on New Kind of Radio.
Doesn't quite feel like soccer season anymore out there, does it? But as we go into overtime here on Gike's Got Game, I'm going to tell you why this may be the most important event at Highmark Stadium of the 2018 calendar year coming up on Sunday. It's called Peace on the Pitch, and with the tagline of Standing Together Through the Beautiful Game, inspired by the aftermath of the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill a few weeks back. The Riverhounds are teaming up with altruistic-minded soccer fans in the Pittsburgh area from 12 to 4 p.m. at Highmark Stadium this Sunday to put on a 7-on-7 tournament, a fundraiser event, as I mentioned, called Peace on the Pitch. All proceeds and donations are being split between the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh and the City of Pittsburgh Department of Public Safety. I say good on you to the Hounds. I call it a mitzvah. I am not Jewish. I do not speak much Yiddish. The most Yiddish I know is what I got from Seinfeld, I would suppose, from my experiences watching that program. That's really my exposure to the Jewish community for the most part, as I grew up Catholic and around a lot of Catholics. But since I've moved to Pittsburgh, I've gotten more immersed in that community, and obviously I think all of us feel much closer to that community after what happened last month, and part of that includes the Hounds, who, as most of you know, I broadcast games for on ESPN Plus over the course of the season. As I mentioned, the season is over, but very important stuff here. So go to riverhounds.com for more information on Peace on the Pitch to see if you can get involved. I think there are still opportunities for openings. Teams must check in to register to play in this 7-on-7 tournament between 12 and 1 p.m. coming up on Sunday. Yes, it'll be cold, but I think the snow will be passed by then. But you're telling me weather's going to hold you back from contributing to a cause like this. And to take the positive aspects of sports, I always say I want to help make sport a force for societal good. I think that is sport's most valuable resource to bring us closer together, not to pull us further apart, despite what you may be told or what you may feel when your team is playing the rival, or when you feel like your team needs to blow things up and start over. Let's keep in mind what sport was intended to be. It was supposed to unite communities, I think, at least. And we're seeing a great example of that coming up here on Sunday. 64 openings for teams are offered. So last I checked, there are still some opportunities to get involved if you're a soccer player, even if you're not much of a soccer player. I'm competing with the Mongols team. Mongols is a podcast on the Beautiful Game Network and Pittsburgh Riverhounds podcast that is essentially weekly. I think they do a great job, the guys and gals over there, and I'm humbled that they would invite me. I'm honored they would invite me to take part in playing for their team. Hopefully I don't hurt you too much. I've been playing some pickup soccer lately, but my competitive experience in soccer is pretty much limited to my senior year of high school when my brother convinced me to come out for the team so we'd have enough players to even have a team. And lo and behold, I was suddenly a starting wingback, even though I didn't have really any experience playing outside of keeper prior to that. So, what I'm saying is I'm not a stud. You don't have to be a stud to go out there and play this Sunday to contribute to something positive. There are several age groups here for kids under 6, under 8, under 10, under 12, under 14, under 16, under 18, and 20 years or older. Clearly you know which group I'm going to be in there. We're going to be among the fogies, if you will, taking part and try not to embarrass ourselves. But even if you don't want to play, you can also come to the event. You can attend. There will be prize baskets containing special items for raffle on the day of the event this Sunday. And also, profits from the concessions and a 50-50 raffle will go toward those two organizations that I mentioned earlier, the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh and the city's Department of Public Safety. Parking will also be a $5 donation, with all proceeds going to the fundraising efforts on behalf of ABM Parking Services. There are going to be T-shirts that you can buy benefiting the overall fundraising efforts. If you want to get involved, email Director of Marketing of the Hounds, Jordan Kay, at jkay@riverhounds.com. I think this is very much worthy of its own segment here to close out this show. And I also believe that this is a big deal for an organization in the Hounds in the off-season. On a cold Sunday, they could very easily just close up shop or say, hey, just start a GoFundMe, and we're going to contribute to it that way. But actually putting people in front of each other, realizing that we have more in common than we do different, I think in this digital age, it's all the more important to get together in the real community and not just communicate with each other online. So that's why I love participatory sports. That's why I like to talk about that. Rec sports, I think they're just as important, if not more important, than the big-time pro leagues and teams and the college side of things that we all talk about so much on this program and on others very much like it. Yeah, that's a common interest, and yes, it does bring in the clicks and the listens and the views, but we all need to get involved. We all need to, not just for our own mental health, but for our physical health too. That's why I'm all about sport. That's why I love sport, and when altruism and sport can come together, whether it's here in this case or through my endeavors on my new project with Rocco DeMero and others, Do Goodery, do-goodery.org. That's where I feel they talk about in life your vocation is where your skills meet the needs of the community at large. And that's where I feel like there's that greatest influence or confluence for me to have influence. And I'm applauding the Hounds for feeling the same way about their position in sports and using their platform for this greater good. So, again, Peace on the Pitch is the event, and that is Sunday, just 2 days from today. I would be remiss in not mentioning last weekend. I'll give my kudos out to the Penn State Nittany Lions men's hockey team, as much as it may pain me to say as a member of the RMU men's hockey team, as their public relations representative. Penn State was just flat better last weekend. It was a lot of fun going up to Pagula Ice Arena, and even more fun to see our building down on the island. And if you did come out, thank you for that. A stick tap to you. It was probably our largest crowd in island history. We had to call it our third largest technically because we're literally scanning tickets these days and we're a little more precise about the actual numbers compared to years past. But it was wild down there at the island. I know Penn State pulled away for a win, and Penn State is certainly well deserving of their number 6 ranking in the country. But it was a lot of fun to see our boys in red, white, and blue go toe-to-toe with one of the top teams in front of some great atmospheres up at Penn State and down on the island. I hope that if you were there, that you liked what you saw, and if you missed out on getting down to the island, you might have a chance to see us next on Black Friday, in fact, as we host our in-state rival Mercyhurst. That'll be at 7 o'clock on Black Friday at the Island Sports Center. And the Army women are in action this weekend against Minnesota State, both tonight and Saturday. So go to rmucolonials.com for ticket information. Thus ends my shill pitch for the week for college hockey. And in general, I just want to see you out there. Enjoy hockey in all forms. Enjoy sports in all forms. Let's just not get attached to the top level of everything all the time. The grassroots is where the real momentum lies, and that's where the real community lies, in my opinion. Thanks to Brian Crawford for joining me on today's show, and thank you to you for listening and or watching, whether it just be this week or each and every week on Gike's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Geica, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. God bless, stay warm, stay safe out there on the roads, and I'll talk to you next week on the River's Edge.